Hare Krishna, good evening. Welcome to the Friday evening Hare Krishna Sangha. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very grateful to see you here on a Friday when you could have been doing so many other things. And welcome, and I see a new face at the back there. Hare Krishna. Okay, so that's a new face at the back there, yes? Hiya. Cheryl. Hare Krishna, Cheryl. Nice to see you, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for coming. Have you been to this sort of thing before? I have. You have, so I don't need to go into any instructions about what we do and what this is all about. Okay, so we're going to do some Kirtan, some meditation first. And then we'll be starting a new project. Really, well, it started last week actually, with Connor and Ari, very kind in introducing the Bhagavad Gita. We're going to go, usually we just dip into the Bhagavad Gita, normally into a verse. But it's been requested by a few people, I think, we go through the whole thing, right? So we're starting right at the starting. So we'll be starting from chapter 1, verse 1. We had a nice introduction to the Bhagavad Gita last week. Do you know the Bhagavad Gita? Have you heard of the Bhagavad Gita? You have, okay, so that's okay. So we'll be doing that, and everything else is as per normal. I don't think there's anything, announcements to make, is there? Nothing's happening at the moment, no? Apart from Brighton, Ratha Yatra tomorrow, for those who are heading down to the coast. It's a very nice thing. It starts at 12 o'clock, I believe, on the seafront of Brighton, so if you can get down there for that, it's very recommended. It's an ecstatic day with free food, of course, and everything else. So it starts at the 360. I think it's called the I-360, isn't it? That's where it normally starts. That's where we normally begin that. Yeah, so that's tomorrow. The weather's very nice, so that's all tomorrow. So we'll begin with some Kirtan, and then we'll see where we go from there. Sham ki I sit up one out now, so you can go now. Are you okay down there? Yes? Thank you very much. Okay, so just a little bit about chanting. I've been highlighting sections from this Harinam Chintamani book, which I've been reading recently. Hare Krishna. Written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which is a conversation between Lord Chaitanya and Haridas Thakur. So it's nice to just meditate a little bit on the holy name, on this chanting. And this is from the final chapter, actually, of this book, which I recommend, if you've never read it, it's definitely a really lovely book to read. Well, they're all nice, really, actually. And this one's very nice when it comes to the offences against chanting, and the process of chanting, and the results of chanting, and the different stages of chanting this Mahamantra, which affect us, different stages of realisation, different levels of ecstatic symptoms, etc., etc. This is for you, right? In a minute. Yeah. So, the holy name, that's this chanting, right? The holy name is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama, Hare Hare. The holy name is the greatest and yet the easiest obtainable spiritual treasure. Well, that's true, isn't it? What spiritual process could be more simple than saying 3 words? Yeah, especially in this age, in Kali Yuga, it's very difficult to meditate. Meditation isn't easy, if not impossible, for most people, actually. When we think about meditation or different forms of meditation, sitting quietly and controlling the mind, or focusing on a candle or whatever it is, that's not in the Bhagavad Gita, by the way, so we don't recommend that. And Krishna never says focus on a candle. Don't think anyway, not that I've read anyway. But there are so many different types of meditation, right? But they're all difficult, actually, very difficult, because the mind, we're really disturbed in Kali Yuga. The mind is very disturbed, and the process of meditation is ultimately to control the mind and achieve a state of mental peace and get into this mode of, into this sattvic state of mind. From there, when the mind is pure and clean and at peace, then you can begin to understand transcendence. You can't do it in any other state of being under the influence of the other modes of nature. So you have to be situated in the mode of goodness, and that's one of the first results of chanting, is peace of mind. Yeah? And that's just a starting point. Yeah? Yes? Which everybody wants that, yeah? I think most people do, don't they? Want some peace. Yeah. So this treasure is obtained when the jiva, that's us, chants with faith and devotion, not caring for karma, jnana and yoga. The jiva quickly and easily ascends to the highest perfection by following this method of nam bhajan, which is what we've just been doing, really. Bhajan is like music, you can do it in various ways, but bhajan is chanting, singing. And Nam is this name, this Hare Krishna mantra, the name. This method is the best of methods, and even better than other methods of bhakti. So there are various methods of bhakti. If you read the books, there are various things you can do, like deity worship, all sorts of different things, right? Yes, there are there's different. But this is the best. Chanting is the best. It's the most complete. The basic requirement for successful accomplishment of Nam Bhajan is that the sadhaka must totally shun bad association. That's one of our biggest problems, right? Yeah? Especially in this world when we have to work, and we have to survive in this not very nice society we live in many ways. There's nice people out with good intentions, but if they're not helping us spiritually, it's probably best to treat them as acquaintances and not get too involved, especially if they're depending on their lifestyles and stuff like that. It doesn't help us, it won't help us. And engage in the practice of devotional service in the company of saintly devotees of the Lord. Well, you're not going to do very well Not yet. We're aspiring to become devotees. Being a really full-on devotee, a pure devotee, as we were discussing last night in the book club, like Srila Prabhupada, that's a very high state of being to achieve. We're just, taking first baby steps, but we're very fortunate that we can hang on to Srila Prabhupada's dhoti, and he will help us. As somebody said to him once, he said, it's very difficult to get back into Vaikuntha, into the spiritual world. He said, but I have the key to the back door, so just hold on to my dhoti and I'll take you in there. So that's what we have to do. As we've discussed before, we have to have faith in Srila Prabhupada. He will help us, and he will. So that will help us, because we're not elevated souls in any way, shape or form. But we have the good fortune to be being instructed and helped by one. Saintly devotees. Pure love of Krishna is the expression of unalloyed devotional service. Only a pure devotee's heart has the inclination and capability of receiving prema. The non-devotee's heart denies it. Prema refuses to enter the heart of one who does not keep the company of devotees. The jiva's decision to accept either good or bad association has a powerful and lasting influence on his destiny. So it's up to us. We can choose who we associate with. We can choose what we do in life. We can choose, our path. We have free will like that. But if we associate with devotees, then our elevation to the spiritual platform will be very quick. Not only that, it supports each other. We support each other. When you're on that sort of platform of at least trying to experience something higher, when you're with people who are doing the same thing, then there's support, and it's like a family, right? Nurturing that particular way of life and way of being, because it's not so difficult, it's not so easy to be like that in this age, because Kali Yuga, the influence of the Kali Yuga and the material energy is extremely powerful, right? Yeah, very powerful. Maya is very strong and very tricky, and she'll distract us, do her best to distract us both internally and externally. And more as Kali Yuga goes on, more and more she will try to distract us. And the stronger we get, the more and more she will try and distract us even more, right? So there's only one way we can remain strong, and that is to keep the association of like-minded people with other devotees, yes? Which is what I think all of us here are doing, as far as I'm aware, at least to some degree. So that's good, yeah? Personally, I live for Friday nights, It's my, it's the best part of the week, right? For me it is. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but, it's wonderful, isn't it, coming together with devotees, And the uplifting effect that has, along with prasadam and chanting, is wonderful, yes. There are no inebrities, yes. The material world doesn't have an influence in here for all this few hours that we join together on a Friday, right? Yeah. So I'm sure we all experience that to some degree or another, if we are here or in the temple or wherever we go to. And that's what attracts us, right? Krishna is, so attractive, and the process is so attractive. And this chanting, when you start to develop a taste for it, there is nothing better, right? Anybody tell me of anything better? No, there isn't anything nicer, is there? I don't know of anything better. No, I don't think so. I've never had I've tried lots of things in my life, times in my life, but, at the time they may seem very nice, but they don't keep bringing me back. They don't attract me, or they have a negative effect on me, yes? A derogatory effect on me physically and mentally, yeah? And that's not good, is it? So, but chanting doesn't, coming together with devotees doesn't. That's always uplifting, and that's always nice. And the pleasure increases. I remember went down to the Folkestone temple one day, and I was sitting there, and there's a lady down there, there's a devotee down there, is a very good cook. And I was sitting there eating the prasadam, and I said to her, this just gets better and better. And she says, of course it does, it's Krishna. And it's true, isn't it? It just gets better and better all the time. The pleasure keeps on increasing and increasing and increasing. increasing. And it's the same with chanting. If we do it, and we focus on it, and we make sure that we don't listen to our mind, and our mind will try and distract us from doing it, and we do it, then we'll experience higher and higher levels of pleasure. Yes? So the chanting, as we always say, is the key to the whole process. It's the most important thing, and as we just read there's nothing to match it, actually, ultimately. It's the topmost meditation for the age. It's the recommended process of meditation for this age we live in. Above all others, there is no other meditation that comes close to it. There is no other meditation that gives us knowledge, bliss, yes, and makes us realise our eternity and our relationship with Krishna. And also that Krishna will also, the more serious we become and the more we do it, Krishna will reveal himself to us in many amazing ways, right? Always amazing, as we were discussing again last night. Srila Prabhupada, we were talking last night in the book club that how amazing Srila Prabhupada is, and how more amazed we are by all the time. Yes? Correct? Incredible. And how was he so amazing? Well, he's an empowered personality, yes, but when he came to the West, we were discussing last night what he did, all he did was come and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There is so much power in that 3 words. So, don't neglect it. Do it all the time if you can, as much as possible, and always try to keep the association of others who are doing that as well, and then we'll be happy, yes, and satisfied, and blissful and worn out. I was just thinking when we were doing that kirtan then, I was just thinking of Lord Chaitanya actually. It came to my mind about, how in House of Srivas and everything back in Mayapur, they were chanting for days. This chanting for days they went on doing that. I was thinking, after half an hour, I was thinking, for days and nights they were continually doing this, Wow, just imagine the ecstatic state they must have been in, to do that. It's terrific. Amazing. Anyway, okay, so tonight we start this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, as has been requested. So we did a nice introduction last week. So before we do that, we'll do Radha Madhava. Last week we had the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, very nicely explained. Now, so tonight we're going to start with chapter 1, verse 1. Everybody knows the Bhagavad Gita, right? Yeah? Just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with it. Everybody who's not read the Bhagavad Gita? Okay. Who has read the Bhagavad Gita? This one? Bhagavad Gita as it is. Remember, there are over 400 different translations of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, this one. This is our Guru's, Srila Prabhupada's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's called the Bhagavad Gita as it is, as we discussed last week. So all these 400 and odd translations of this particular scripture or book, I don't think none have ever made any devotees of Krishna. This one has made millions. Why? Because of its potency. Because it is the Bhagavad Gita as it is. It has not been interpreted. Prabhupada has translated it and not interpreted in its purports and in the translations, not interpreted what Krishna is saying. When he says Krishna says this, he means Krishna says this, not, oh, Krishna means this. No. Krishna says this, he means this, right? So that's where the potency comes from. Also, as also was mentioned by Connor and Ari last week, this parampara, this disciplic succession. You can trace back our guru-disciple relationship back all the way back to Krishna, in an unbroken line. So there is a plug into the generator, if you like. So there is potency in this particular book, this version of Bhagavad Gita. So, we're going to read the first verse of the first chapter, and I think in the future weeks we'll be going through the Bhagavad Gita like this, or rather dipping into it, right? So, the first chapter is called Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kurukshetra. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is spoken on a battlefield, right? And to a lot of people, and I've had many conversations with people who say, well, if you're all love and peace, why is your main scripture spoken on a battlefield? Yeah, seems like a rather odd thing, doesn't it? Well, we should find out, maybe. This one's falling apart, we need a new one. It's a bit like me, falling apart. But anyway, so on the battlefield, we'll explain maybe a little bit about that as we go through. So the first one, which I think is up, yes, Bhagavad Gita 1:1. On this chapter, Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kurukshetra. Dhritarashtra yuvacha Dharmakshetra Kurukshetra Samaveta Yuyutsavaha Mamakha Pandavaschaiva Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. So, Dhritarashtra Vacha, King Dhritarashtra said, Dharmakshetra, in the place of pilgrimage, Kurukshetra, in the place named Kurukshetra, Samavitaha, assembled, Yuyutsavaha, desiring to fight, Mamakha, my party, sons. Pandavaha, the sons of Pandu. Cha, and. Eva, certainly. Kim, what? Akurvata, did they do? Sanjaya, O Sanjaya. Translation. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? Now, Kurukshetra, you see this first verse is this word Dharma Kshetra, in the place of pilgrimage, and then Kurukshetra. So that implies or tells us that this place where they assembled to fight was a very, very spiritual place, area. This whole place of Kurukshetra. It's a Dharma. It's a very dharmic place. There's a lot of power, spiritual power there. Yeah. So Dhritarashtra, this blind king, had asked his son Jaya to relate what was going on the battlefield because he couldn't see. He'd been blind from birth. So he was asking Sanjaya, who had been given this mystic power to be able to see. Because Dhritarashtra was actually in Delhi at the time, in Hastinapur, which was the capital of India, right? So Dhritarashtra wasn't anywhere near the battlefield. He was actually in Delhi, or Hastinapur as it was known then. And Sanjay was with him, and he was relating what was going on by this mystical power he had. So, which was interesting. But that was interesting that it's a place of pilgrimage. Why would they have a war? And this was worrying Dhritarashtra actually, because Dhritarashtra knew, and we've probably experienced it ourselves, that at these places, and there aren't many in the UK, but if anybody has some spiritual interest or some realization or some knowledge of anything spiritual, if you go to a place like Rochester, for example, as opposed to, say, Chatham, there's a different atmosphere, right, which you can pick up on, yes? Because it's been a place of pilgrimage and a spiritual religious place for 1,000 years, there is some element of power, right, of spiritual power in the place. I used to notice it very much when I went to Glastonbury. If you go to Glastonbury, you'll find it's there as well. There's this atmosphere, a spiritual, mystical atmosphere that pervades things. Now, I've been there with gross materialists, and they say, I don't believe it. And I'm like, what? You know, this is later when I'm going back to my hippie days. You know. But even now, you know, if you go to places like that where there has been worship and pilgrimage and spiritual activity or religious activity going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, there is a difference in the atmosphere, right? And if you are a spiritually minded person, you probably pick up on that. Whereas materialists, they generally don't. But it's a shared experience, so it's not something that we're imagining. It's definitely there. You know, I mean, it's like chanting Hare Krishna, right? It's a shared experience. The bliss or the ecstasy that we all get from that is shared. Now, I couldn't describe that in words, but there is something special, right? Something spiritual, something different, something mystical about it. And that's the same with these places of pilgrimage. And Kurukshetra is one of them places, yes? So Dhritarashtra was a bit worried because, you know, he probably understood that to some degree that was going to help the opposite side, who his son, Duryodhana, and others were fighting, yes? So just as an outline of what this place was, where it says Dharma Kshetra, it's a very dharmic place. So that was probably one of it would help the goodies as opposed to the baddies in this situation. One of the reasons. So we'll read Srila Prabhupada's purport and see what Prabhupada has to say. The Bhagavad Gita is the widely read theistic science summarized in the Gita Mahatmya, glorification of the Gita. There it says that one should read the Bhagavad Gita very scrutinizingly with the help of a person who is a devotee of Sri Krishna and try to understand it without personally motivated interpretations. The example of clear understanding is there in the Bhagavad Gita itself, in the way the teaching is understood by Arjuna. Now Arjuna is this other person on the cover here, for those of you who Krishna is talking to. The blue person is Krishna, and this is Arjuna, who's a warrior, and who's engaging in the battle. The example of clear understanding is there in Bhagavad Gita, is understood by Arjuna, who heard the Gita directly from the Lord. If someone is fortunate enough to understand the Bhagavad Gita in that line of disciplic succession, without motivated interpretation, then he surpasses all studies of Vedic wisdom and all scriptures in the world. All scriptures in the world. So the Bhagavad Gita is the topmost knowledge. There is no higher knowledge than what is being discussed and spoken about in this particular book. In any scripture, any spiritual activity or any spiritual movement or anything else in the whole world, and I've found that to be true. There are things in here which you will never hear in any other religious process or religious book, or I've spoken to very many different people of different religious practices. They never seem to have the knowledge that is spoken in here, right? I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, but it's not there, right? It's very, very high knowledge. That is the special standard of the Bhagavad Gita. It is the perfect theistic science because it is directly spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. Now again, we may say, well, how do I know that? How do I think? What makes you think Krishna is God? Then the Supreme Personality, No, I don't believe that. Yeah? People say that, yeah? Well again, we have to just firstly have a little faith that we're not being lied to, right? In the first place, either by Krishna or by our Guru or by the Vedas, by all, and you can check this out in so many different places about Krishna. If you study and look in there, it's not just us who are saying it. Yeah, it's there in many, many places. Yes, even the majority of the people, like Guru Nanak, for example, from the Sikhs, it's in that book where he accepts Krishna as the supreme. Shankaracharya, all these great people who are not necessarily thought of as Krishna devotees, they all accept Krishna as being the supreme, right? And there are many, many instances of that, and you can investigate that and study that and look through, and you'll find that that's true. When Krishna was here on the planet 5,000 years ago, that was a real thing. He was here. People saw him. This isn't some sort of like imagination or a story that's been made up. Yes? So there are many ways to find that out, but not only that, we can find that out externally, but we can also experience it internally if we have faith, if we study, if we chant, associate with others who have had some realization, and this knowledge will be revealed to us. Krishna will reveal himself, as we discussed earlier, through the chanting, through the association, through the reading. So many ways. Yeah. It's real, and he's real. It's all real. We just have to have a little faith that that's true, and then it will be revealed. Don't reject it just because I believe it's not like that, or my conditioning has told me something else, or I've been instructed by someone else and it's not that. Yeah? Like we said, like Prabhupada says here, there's no higher knowledge than this. So whoever else is trying to tell you something else, they don't have the knowledge. Right? We have to learn from others, yes? And we have to have a bit of faith that they know better than us. If our ego is out of control and we think we know everything, then that's illusion, right? Yes? Correct? We're an illusion if we think we do, because we don't. This universe is vast. To understand anything in this universe, let alone all the other universes that exist, and then beyond that, the spiritual realm, we can't understand that. One devotee was telling me, was trying to explain to me once about understanding the cosmology of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he said, actually, what your situation is, you're laying down looking at the universe underneath a table. What can you actually see? That's our position, right? We can't see anything, really. We know nothing. We're minute. And yet our ego will think, I believe this, I believe that, I don't believe that. So we have to have a little faith and understanding and humility to accept that we don't know everything. Our ego will tell us we do, but we don't. The topics discussed by Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya as described in the Mahabharata, because the Bhagavad Gita is a part of a much bigger volume of work called the Mahabharata. Maha meaning great, Bharat meaning the area of the world where all this took place, which is now India or the Indian subcontinent, that area of the world, which was Bharat back then. That was a world civilization. Vedic civilization 5,000 years ago was worldwide, but the centre of it was in India, that area of the world. So, it's described in the Mahabharata, formed the basic principle of this great philosophy. It is understood that this philosophy evolved on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is a sacred place of pilgrimage from the immemorial time of the Vedic age. It was spoken by the Lord when he was present personally on this planet for the guidance of mankind. This book is meant for our guidance. This conversation with Arjuna wasn't just meant for Arjuna. Yes, it was meant for us. The word Dharma Kshetra, a place where religious rituals are performed, is significant because on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present on the side of Arjuna. So does everybody know the story in the Mahabharata? I suppose most people do, don't they? Have you read them? No? Okay. Well, to put it in a nutshell, it was about a rivalry or a war between two factions of perhaps the same family tree, the Kurus and the Pandavas. And Dhritarashtra is on the Kuru and Arjuna is a Pandava, and the two, because of a whole series of events, you'll have to read the Mahabharata or listen to the audio book, and it's very, very good. It's the greatest story ever told, right, Katie? Forget the Lord of the Rings, this is much better. It is, it's amazing, amazing. So rich, full of so much spiritual realization, so many beautiful stories, and it's a fantastic thing to get into and read. But the Bhagavad Gita comes as part of that. So anyway, these two sides of this family ended up having to have a war, a fight, because good against evil, it's a sort of good against evil sort of thing, really. And I can't really explain it all in the time we have, but please, I recommend that everybody read it or get the audio book, which is very nice. And the best version, or the easiest version, is probably Krishna Dharma's version, which is available on Audible and all that. You can hear the story and everything. That's very nice. Or read it, but it's well worth reading. So anyway, the two, because of differences that couldn't be reconciled, because of Dhritarashtra, this blind king who we talked about, and his son Duryodhana, who wanted to keep the power, and everything else, and everything was done to try and stop this battle from happening. It was everything. Krishna tried, and everybody tried, but because of their greed, their blindness, their materialism, their lust for power, and everything else, it had to happen. So Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kurus, was highly doubtful about the possibility of his son's ultimate victory. In his doubt, he inquired from his secretary Sanjaya, what did they do? He was confident that both his sons and the son of his younger brother Pandu were assembled in that field of Kurukshetra for a determined engagement of the war. Still, his inquiry is significant. He did not want to compromise between the cousins and brothers, and he wanted to be sure of the fate of his sons on the battlefield. Remember, his sons are the baddies, right? Okay, for want of a better word, in this situation. He knew very well that this would influence Arjuna and the sons of Pandu favourably, because by nature they were all virtuous. Like we were saying just now, the place would help influence the virtuous, or the good, because it's a dharmic place. That power that would help the people who Sanjay was a student of Vyasa. And therefore, by the mercy of Vyasa, Sanjay was able to envision the battlefield of Kurukshetra even while he was in the room of Dhritarashtra. Vyasa gave him this mystical power to be able to see. And so Dhritarashtra asked him about the situation on the battlefield. Both the Pandavas and the sons of Dhritarashtra belong to the same family, but Dhritarashtra's mind is disclosed herein. He deliberately claimed only his sons as Kurus, and he separated the sons of Pandu from the family heritage. One can thus understand the specific position of Dhritarashtra in his relationship with his nephews, the sons of Pandu. As in the paddy field, the unnecessary plants are taken out, so it is expected from the very beginning of these topics that the religious field of Kurukshetra, where the father of religion, Sri Krishna, was present, the unwanted plants, like Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana and others, would be wiped out, and the thoroughly religious persons, headed by Yudhishthira, he's the goody, yes, would be established by the Lord. This is the significance of the words Dharma Kshetra and Kurukshetra, apart from their historical and Vedic importance. Now that's just setting the scene for the Bhagavad Gita, yes? Now, there have been many interpretations of this battle, yes, that we can apply to ourselves, and what Krishna is instructing Arjuna throughout this book. And it can be true, it's very true, that we are in a battle, right? We are in a battle with the material energy, yes? All of us, yes? Anybody who has a spiritual aspiration or any intention to do good in the world are actually, we're battling very negative forces, yes? We're also battling our own mind and senses. And as we will find out as we go through the Bhagavad Gita, we'll find that Arjuna is also suffering a lot of these problems that we are suffering. And that is why this is so relevant to us. Because we will see ourselves in Arjuna, actually. Because at the end of the first chapter, I don't want to sort of like go on too much about it because other people will be talking about this, but at the end of the first chapter, Arjuna is in a state of bewilderment and he doesn't know what to do. Yes? He has almost a nervous breakdown because he's a warrior and he has to kill, as we've just heard, his family members. He has to kill them on the battlefield. Just imagine what a state that would cause you, what a position that must be. Yes? You've got to kill your family members. Arjuna is in a real quandary, and he says, I'm not going to fight. I'm just going to go and sit in a cave in the Himalayas. This isn't right. I can't do this. And Krishna then explains why he should. And then he also explains why he should, how he should and why he should. Because, what's the main reason why? Because everything, this material body, isn't real. That's the basic principle of the whole thing. We are jivas, we are spiritual beings. So actually nobody is getting killed on this battlefield. That's really the most basic first instruction. We are not the body. Yeah? It's an awful situation. Unfortunately, we don't have to be in a situation like this, but from this book and from this conversation, we can understand our own predicament in the material world. We're not the body, but we're fighting or trying to control or trying to enjoy and be happy in a place where we don't really belong. It's a temporary place, we're in temporary bodies, we're in a temporary machine which we're going to leave at some point, but we don't die. We carry on, we're eternal beings. So this can be, we can read the Bhagavad Gita, as Prem was saying last week, the Bhagavad Gita is an amazing book. Everything about Krishna consciousness is amazing. You can go into any place in the Bhagavad Gita. If you've got some, thinking about something, you'll get the answer here, yes. It's incredible, I've read this Bhagavad Gita maybe, 20 times maybe. I've been in groups who have on, studied it and everything else, but still it keeps producing more and more nectar, all the time. Like the prasadam in Folkestone, like Krishna, it just gets better and better. It gets more enlightening. It makes us deal with life so much better. We can deal with things better. It answers all our questions, yes? It helps us in our battle against Maya, against the material energy. The Bhagavad Gita is an extremely important book, and we should study it, hopefully with other devotees, and that will help us to understand it better, yes? That always helps. So, that was just an overview of the first verse. I mean, I'm not a particularly very knowledgeable about the Mahabharata and all of these names and all of these characters. There are a lot of them, because I wasn't brought up in that tradition. A lot of Indian people, people who are brought up in that tradition, know much more about it than I do. But, the basis is that, really. This battle was fought for a reason. It was a religious battle and a spiritual battle, and we can think of ourselves as being Arjuna, and Krishna is talking through this book directly to us, and he's giving us all this knowledge of yoga and karma, yes, and meditation. Everything is in here. It all comes from here, right? We wouldn't know about karma if it wasn't for this. We wouldn't know about the gunas, yes? What other religious scripture has any information about the material energy and how it works? I don't know any. It's all explained. Krishna explains it all very nicely and very clearly and very understandably. And Srila Prabhupada has presented it in a very, very clear way. So we should all read this and study it. And hopefully come here on a Friday night now, because we'll be going through it right from start to finish, hopefully, which will take at least 700 weeks. There's 700 verses, right? So we're in for the long haul, by the looks of things.
Straightforward mathematics.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, right. For the next, we've got a course now for the next 700 weeks. I mean, I did intend to sort of skip through a few of the verses on the first chapter for tonight, but it doesn't look like I'm going to have time for that, so it looks like we're... and the other thing that they do on here, you can see from this picture very nice, they blow their conch shells. We noticed that when Krishna and Arjuna are blowing these conch shells, and it really puts fear into all of these millions of soldiers on the battlefield. You wait till you hear this. You think that's going to fill you with fear. Wow. Sorry. So anyway, Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments or anything on that? No, that's setting the scene. Is that fairly clear? Hope. Yes? Okay, Hare Krishna. We'll have a Kirtan then for Arati. Thank you very much.
गंगा माई की यमुना माई की श्री श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय, श्री श्री मथुरा धाम की जय, श्री श्री मायापुर धाम की जय, श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। All glories to somebody, all glories to somebody, all glories to somebody, all glories, all glories, all glories.